Okay. There were many paths that led up into these mountains and many passes over them, but most of the paths were cheats and deceptions and led nowhere or to a bad end, and most of these passes were infested by evil things and dreadful dangers. The dwarfs and the hobbits, helped by the wise advice of Elrond and the knowledge and memory of Gandalf, took the right road to the right path. Long days after they had climbed out of the valley and left the last homely house miles behind, they were still going up and up and up. It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely and long. Now they could look back over the lands they had left and laid out behind them far below. Far, far away in the west, where things were blue and faint, Bilbo knew there lay his own country of safe and comfortable things, and his little hobbit hole. He shivered. It was getting bitter cold up here, and the wind came shrill among the rocks. Boulders too at times came galloping down the mountainsides, let loose by midday sun upon the snow, and passed among them, which was lucky, or over their heads, which was alarming. The nights were comfortless and chill, and they did not dare to sing or talk too loud, for the echoes were uncanny, and the silence seemed to dislike being broken, except by the noise of water, and the wail of wind, and the crack of stone. The summer is getting on down below, thought Bilbo, and haymaking is going on and picnics. They will be harvesting and blackberrying before we even begin to go down the other side of this rate. And the others were thinking equally gloomy thoughts, although when they had said goodbye to Elrond in the high hope of midsummer morning, they had spoken gaily of the passage of the mountains, and of riding swift across the lands beyond. They had thought of coming to the secret door in the lonely mountain, perhaps the very first next moon of autumn, and perhaps it will be Durin's day, they had said. Only Gandalf had shaken his head and said nothing. The dwarfs had not passed that way for many years, but Gandalf had, and he knew how evil and dangers had grown and thriven in the wild, since the dragons had driven men from the lands, and the goblins had spread in secret after the battle of the mines of Moria. Even the good plans of wise wizards like Gandalf and of good friends like Elrond go astray when you are off on dangerous adventures over the edge of the wild, and Gandalf was a wise enough wizard to know it. He knew that something unexpected might happen, and he hardly dared to hope that they would pass without fearful adventure over those great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. They did not. All was well until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. You know how terrific a really big thunderstorm can be down in the land, in a river valley, especially at times when two great thunderstorms meet and clash. More terrible still are thunder and lightning in the mountains at night, when storms come up from the east and the west and make war, and the lightning splinters on peaks and rocks shiver, and great crashes split the air and go rolling and tumbling into every cave and hollow, and the darkness is filled with overwhelming noise and sudden light. Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of the kind. They were high in a narrow place, with a dreadful fall into a dim valley on one side of them. They were sheltering under a hanging rock for the night, and he lay beneath a blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out at the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley the stone giants were out, and were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered in little bits with a bang. Then came a wind and a rain, and the wind whipped the rain, and the hail, about in every direction, so that an overhanging rock was no protection at all, and soon they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whinnying with fright. They could hear the giants guffawing and shouting and all along the mountainsides. "This won't do at all," said Thorin. "If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall be picked by some giant and kicked sky high for a football." "Well, if you know anything better, take us there," said Gandalf, who was feeling very grumpy and was far from happy about the giants himself. The end of the argument was that they sent Fili and Kili to look for a better shelter. They had very sharp eyes, and being the youngest of the dwarfs by some 50 years, they usually got these shorter jobs when everybody could see that it was absolutely no use sending Bilbo. There is nothing like looking if you want to find something. Or so Thorin said to the young dwarfs. You certainly usually find something if you look. It is not always quite the something you were after, and so it proved on this occasion. Soon Fili and Kili came crawling back, holding on to the rocks in the wind. "We have found a dry cave," they said, "not far round the next corner, and ponies and all could get inside." "Have you thoroughly explored it?" said the wizard, who knew that caves in the mountains were seldom unoccupied. Yes, they said, though everybody knew that they could not have been long about it. They had come back too quickly. "It isn't all that big, and it does not go very far back." That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far they go back. Sometimes, or where a passage behind may lead to, or what is waiting for you inside. But now Fili and Kili's news seemed good enough, so they all got up and prepared to move. The wind was howling, and the thunder was still growling, and they had a business getting themselves and their ponies along. Still, it was not very far to go, and before they long they came to a big rock standing out in the path, and if you stepped behind, you found a low arch in the side of the mountain. There was just room to get the ponies through with a squeeze, and when they had been unpacked and unsaddled, as the day passed under the arch, it was good to hear the wind and the rain outside instead of all about them, and to feel safe from the giants and the rocks. But the wizard was taking no risks. He lit up his wand, as he did that day in Bilbo's dining room. That seemed so long ago, if you remember. And by its light they explored the cave from end to end. It seemed quite a fair size, but not too large, and mysterious. It had a dry floor and some comfortable nooks. At one end there was room for the ponies, and there they stood, mightily glad of the change, steaming and champing in their nosebags. Owen and Glowing wanted to light a fire at the door to dry their clothes, but Gandalf would not hear of it. So they spread out their wet things on the floor and got dry ones out of their bundles, and then they made their blankets comfortable and got their pipes and blew smoke rings, which Gandalf turned into different colours and set dancing up by the roof to amuse them. They talked and forgot about the storm, and discussed what each would do with his share of the treasure when they got it, which at the moment did not seem so impossible. And so they dropped off to sleep one by one, and that was the last time that they used the ponies, packages, baggages, tools and paraphernalia that they had brought with them. It turned out a good thing that night that they had brought little Bilbo with them, after all, for somehow he could not sleep for a long time, and when he did sleep he had a very nasty dream. He dreamt that the crack in the wall at the back of the cave got bigger and bigger, and opened wider and wider.
You're not using it just now, weird is it? Yeah, it's been thrown.
And he was very afraid that he could not call out or do anything but lie and look. And then he dreamt that the floor of the cave was giving way and he was slipping, beginning to fall down, goodness knows where to. At that he woke up with a horrible start and found that as part of his dream was true. A crack had opened at the back of the cave and was already a wide passage. He was just in time to see the last of the pony's tail disappearing into it. Of course he gave a very loud yell, as loud a yell as a hobbit can give, which is surprising for their size. Out jumped the goblin, big goblin, great ugly looking goblin, lots of goblins. Before they could say rocks and blocks, there were 6 to each dwarf at least, and 2 even per Bilbo, and they were all grabbed and carried through the crack before they could say tinder and flint. And not Gandalf, Bilbo's yell had done very much good. It had wakened up wide in a splinter second, and when goblins came to grab him, there was a terrific flash like lightning in the cave, and a smell like gunpowder, and several of them fell dead. The clack closed with a snap, and Bilbo and the dwarfs were on the wrong side of it. Where was Gandalf? Of that neither they nor the goblins had any idea, and the goblins did not wait to find out. They seized Bilbo and the dwarfs and hurried them along. It was a deep, deep, dark, such as only goblins that have taken to living in the heart of the mountains can see through. The passages were crossed and tangled in all directions, but the goblins knew their way, as well as you do to the nearest post office. And the way they went down and down, it was most horribly stuffy. The goblins were very rough and pinched unmercifully, and chuckled and laughed in their horrible stony voices, and Bilbo was more unhappy even then than when the troll had picked him up by his toes. He wished again and again for his nice bright hobbit hole, not for the last time. Now there came a glimmer of red light before them, and the goblins began to sing or croak, keeping time with the flap of their flat feet on the stone, and shaking their prisoners as well. Clap, snap, the black crack, grab, grab, pinch, snap, run down to Goblin Town, you go my lad. Clash, crash, crash, smash, hammer and tongs, knocker and gongs, pound ground, far underground, ho, ho, my lad. Swish, smack, whip, crack, bitter and beat, hammer and beat, work, work, not dare to shirk, while goblin quaff and goblins laugh, round and round for underground below, my lad. It sounded truly terrifying. The walls echoed to the slap, clap, and crash, smash, and so to the ugly laughter of their ho, ho, my lad. The general meaning of the song was only too plain, for now the goblins took out whips and whipped them with a swish smack, and sent them running as fast as they could in front of them, and more than one of the dwarfs were already yammering and bleating like anything when they stumbled into a big cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle, by torches along the walls, and it was full of goblins. They all laughed and stamped and clapped their hands, while the dwarfs, with poor Bilbo at the back and nearest to the whips, came running in, while the goblins whooped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already there, huddled in a corner, and there were all their baggages and packages, lying broken open and being rummaged by goblins, and smelt by goblins, and fingered by goblins, and quarrelled over by goblins. I'm afraid that's the last I ever saw of those excellent little ponies, including a jolly, sturdy little white fellow, which Elrond had lent to Gandalf, since his horse was not suitable for the mountain path. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys, and other much more dreadful things, and they are always hungry. And just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only of themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs, and linked them all together in a line, and dragged them to the far end of the cavern, with little Bilbo tugging at the end of the rope. There in the shadows, on a large flat stone, sat a tremendous goblin, with a huge head, and armed goblins were standing round him, carrying axes and the bent swords that they use. Now goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any but the most skillful dwarfs. And when they take the trouble, though they're usually untidy and dirty, hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture, they make very well, or get other people to make to their design. Prisoners and slaves that they have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once, for wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also nor working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, and in those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it is called, so far. They did not hate dwarfs especially, no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous. In some parts, wicked dwarfs even made alliances with them, but they had a special grudge against Thorin's people because of the war which they'd heard mentioned, but which does not come into this tale. And anyway, goblins don't care who they catch, as long as it is done smart and secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. "Who are these miserable persons?" said the great goblin. "Dwarfs in this," said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so it fell forward on his knees. "We found them sheltering in our front porch." "What do you mean by it?" said the great goblin, turning to Thorin. "Up to no good, I'll warrant. Spying on the private business of my people, I guess. Thieves, I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers and friends of elves, not unlikely. Come, what have you got to say?" "Thorin, the dwarf, at your service," he replied. It was merely a polite nothing. "Of the things which you suspect and imagine, we have no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave, and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than inconveniencing goblins in any way whatsoever." That was true enough. Said the great goblin, "so you say. Might I ask what you were doing up in the mountains at all? And who were you coming from? And where were you going to? In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it will do you much good, Thorin Oakensfield. I know too much about your folk already. But let's have the truth, or I will prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you." "We are on a journey to visit our relatives, our nephews and nieces, and first, second and third cousins, and the other descendants of our grandfathers, who live at the east side of those truly hospitable mountains," said Thorin, not quite knowing what to say all at once in a moment, when obviously the exact truth would not do at all. "He is a liar, O tremendous one," said one of the drivers. "Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are as dead as stones. Also, he has not explained this." And he held out the sword that Thorin had worn, the sword that had come from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth and clashed their shields and stamped. They knew that sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time, when the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills, or did battle before their walls. They called it Orcrist, Goblin Keever, but the goblins called it simply Bitter, Biter. They hated it, and hated worse anyone that carried it. "Murderers and elf friends," the great goblin shouted. "Slash them, beat them, bite them, gnash them. Take them away to dark holes full of snakes, and never let them see the light again." He was such a rage that he jumped off his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth open. Just at that moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went off, poof, into a tower of blue glowing smoke, right up to the roof, which scattered piercing white sparks all among the goblins. The yells and yammering and croaking and jabbering and gibbering and howls and growls and curses and shrieking and stroking and striking that followed were beyond description. Several hundred wild cats and wolves began being roasted slowly alive together, could not have compared with it. The sparks were burning holes in the goblins, and the smoke that now fell from the roof made air thick for even their eyes to see through. And soon they were falling over one another and rolling as heaps on the floor, biting and kicking and fighting as they had all gone mad. Suddenly a sword flashed in its own light. Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood dumbfounded in the middle of his rage. He fell dead, and the goblin soldiers fled before the sword, shrieking into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath. "Follow me quick," said a voice, fierce and quiet. And before Bilbo understood what had happened, he was trotting along again, as fast as he could run and trot, at the end of the line, down more dark passages, with the yells of the goblin hall growing fainter behind him. A pale light was leading them on. "Quicker, quicker," said the voice. "The torches will soon be relit." "Half a minute," said Dorry, who was at the back, next to Bilbo, on a decent pillow. He made the hobbit scramble on his shoulders as best he could with his tied hands, and then off they went at a run, with a clink of chains, and many a stumble, since there were no hands to steady themselves with. Not for a long time did they stop, but by that time they had come right down into the very mountain's heart. Hang on, I'm going to have a break. I'm losing my voice. I'm taking that gobbler.